You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Get bellyache. I got a duty right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. I am UrzaMaster. Joining me as always, Lord Uther and Ren McCormick. Welcome, gentlemen, welcome. And today we are doing a twofer, but we are hop, skipping, and jumping over one episode in the timeline here. We are taking on the last episode of Season 1 of Star Trek and 2 episodes prior. So we're taking on the Alternative Factor and Operation Annihilate today on the Warp Core. The reason we're doing that is arguably the most notable Season 1 episode, City on the Edge of Forever, is just too much to unpack to do it with another episode. So we're going to do that one justice next week and give you a full breakdown of what is one of the most interesting backstories. Can't wait for that, Ren McCormick. I think we are all on bated breath for that. But today we have 2 interesting episodes to speak over, to say the least, and I don't want to take away from anything. Ren McCormick, run us through the Alternative Factor.
Thank you, UrzaMaster. Thank you, Lord Uther, and thanks to you Trekkies out there in this nebula and beyond. UrzaMaster is right. We are going to break with our established, tried and true formula today. And we are actually going to jump one episode in the viewing order. Now, don't panic. The space-time continuum is still very much not at risk. But we do have a spectacular season finale planned for the Warp Core for the original series, Season 1. So we would very much like everybody to tune in and catch our analysis on the city on the edge of forever, and we've also got some other surprises planned. So you won't want to miss the Warp Core season finale for Season 1 before we embark on an all-new set of adventures on a 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds and all of that jazz. So, without further ado, let's take our attention to the Alternative Factor, which aired March 30th, 1967. It is our second episode, directed by the German television director Gerd Oswald. And Gerd previously graced the Warp Core and the original series, directing The Conscience of the King. And you can find our in-depth analysis of that episode a few episodes back here on the Warp Core. Make sure you're clicking on to subscribe and checking out all of our terrific content on Starfleet Federation and the Klingon Empire and those nasty Romulans. The episode was written by Don Engels. He's not quite a Nepo baby, but he did have connections. He was actually a lifelong friend of Gene Roddenberry. They served in the LAPD together, albeit they weren't out on the front lines patrolling. They were in cushy desk jobs, but nevertheless, they protected and served the City of Angels. And they were also both B-17 pilots during World War II. So, I mean, these guys had a history. So naturally, when Don Engels decided to chuck a life behind the badge and strike out as in Hollywood, he followed his friend Roddenberry out to the Gold Coast and began working with him on various television projects. And here was his first episode. This is his debut as a Star Trek writer. On the feature side, he does have one notable credit. He did the sequel to Airport. It was Airport, the first sequel to Airport. It was Airport 1975, and for those of you that
Multiple airports. There's multiple.
There were multiple. There was Airport. There was Airport 1975. There was Airport 1977. There was Airport 1979.
Issues.
Concorde. And in fact, the Zucker brothers and Jim Abrams made fun of all of them in their classic 1980 Airplane. That's correct. So that's what they were making fun of when they came up with that idea. But Airport 1975 stands out. I always enjoyed the plot of this one. A 747, which back in 1975 was a big deal, is on its maiden flight, and a smaller plane crashes into the cockpit, and it kills the pilot, or actually it blinds the pilot. No, the pilot's dead, the co-pilot is blinded, and they've got to find the stewardess to fly the plane. Now, if that sounds like part of the plotting of Airplane, you're absolutely right. So that's
never have the fish.
Right, exactly. Exactly. I had lasagna. So he was responsible for that script, and that just depends on how you feel about the Airport franchise in general. He also wrote the television movie for Captain America that aired in 1979. Features a classic 1979 disco score. It features Captain America riding around with his shield on his back on a motorcycle. It stars Reb Brown, who is no Chris Evans. Reb would later go on to be in You're the Hunter from the Future, and you should Google that if you've never heard of that picture. And the less said about that Captain America, the better. Clearly Marvel hit their stride with Chris Evans and the first Avenger in 2011, but it was pretty grim. A Marvel television movie in 1979. Yeah, you can find it, but I don't recommend it. So, and we had a casting controversy in the alternative factor. Originally, John Drew Barrymore. And does that name sound familiar? It should. That's Drew's father. He was the original Lazarus. But like many in the Barrymore family, he had lifelong issues with substance abuse and mental illness. And so they cast him. He was at this point reduced to doing television. And he had the part of Lazarus, and it was day one of shooting the episode, and he never showed. Like, just agents couldn't find him, production team couldn't find him, he just was in the wind. So they had to hurriedly recast, and they gave us the actor Robert Brown, and we'll be discussing him at length shortly. And the SAG Actors Guild suspended Barrymore for 6 months, where he was not allowed to work or as an actor or have any earnings because of this conduct.
Wow.
You don't sign up for something and then not show up and not tell anybody where you were and what you were doing. So anyways, yes, Drew Barrymore's troubled father was the original Lazarus. I don't know if he would have improved. Well, yes, he would have improved Robert Brown's performance, but we're going to get to that. Because, ladies and gentlemen, brace yourself, there are no seat belts in the 23rd century, but you should buckle up here at home and abroad, because we have hit a bumpy spot. If you remember in Star Trek the motion picture, when they first tried to engage the warp engines and they got pulled into almost a wormhole-like tunnel with a giant meteor, and everything got really blurry and so forth. Basically, bad things happened, and that's where we are with this episode. This is the first, and I say so with no joy in my heart, one of the first truly terrible Star Trek episodes that grace the air. We've been blessed and fortunate that we've had so many classic episodes to start a show off, because as Lord Uther and UrzaMaster have pointed out, generally speaking, it does take some time for a show to find its sea legs and establish footing. And if you look at later Trek shows, from the Next Generation to Deep Space Nine and Voyager and so forth, the further along they got, the more confident in the storytelling and the characters. And you had some truly remarkable shows, growing from those humble origins. So yes, Trek started off out of the gate hot with a lot of foundational science fiction classics and performances, and this was not one of them. And it's a shame that it comes near the end of like I say, a very promising first season. This is a blip. We'll see if it becomes a trend in later episodes. But for now, this one, and I have my thoughts as to why it was a blip. I mean, it's not as if they were just phoning it in at this point. They were still giving it their all, but there was a lot of decisions that were made and creative choices taken or not taken that kind of conspired here. So let's dig in. I think Don Ingalls as a writer, I'm not going to besmirch his memory or so forth, but I think you could tell as a first-time Trek writer, he could put dialogue in Kirk and Spock's and everybody's mouths, but he didn't quite have his finger on the pulse like D.C. Fontana and Gene Kuhn and some of these other were able to fully do it. As I'm watching the episode, I think of actors who may have just been given their lines right before the cameras rolled, in the sense that they don't feel fully inhabitable. Like, it is Kirk and it is Spock, and they are saying things to each other, but it's just like a beat off. Like, the lines just don't quite land as fluidly and as effortlessly as we've seen in other episodes that we really enjoy. This is not A Taste of Armageddon. This is not Space Seed. This is not even The Man Trap, which, again, was one of the early episodes that was really, really strong. When I first saw...
anytime you get Spock referring to an effect, a scientific effect, as winking out, you know something is wrong.
Right. It almost was like that's the best you came up with, and then they doubled down and used it several more times in the episode. So either they were trying to convey a complicated science fiction laws of physics concept to an easily discernible 1967 audience, or they just, quite frankly, somebody missed it in the editing room and said, what did they say? Really? Winking out? So we're back to Vasquez Rocks again, and we spend plenty of time in that favored location. You'll remember we saw quite a bit of it in Shore Leave and Arena. And once again, the direction appears to be, it's almost like taking your class out on a class field trip. There are several points in the episode where the direction appears to be, okay, now go run around the rocks. Yeah, that's right. You climb up there. Now climb down. Now go around over there. And now we'll get the other guy. Yeah, you climb up. And that. So as much as I can't wait to bring Lord Uther and UrzaMaster to the actual site of Vasquez Rocks so they can take selfies and say, we were there. It will be more organized probably and better choreographed than what we've been getting on these early trips there. It's almost as if they were so gobsmacked by the natural geology that they forgot they were trying to tell a story. So in particular, the pursuit of Lazarus is especially grating if you're trying to tune in to an hour-long episode of drama and excitement. And it's not a bad concept. I mean, this literally is, and UrzaMaster will know this and Lord Uther. We're introducing the idea of, again, an alternate universe, a timeline, a mirror universe, if you will. And so this is the first sort of playing around with that, the embryonic reachings of it, and they didn't quite have it. They were workshopping it clearly. And the idea of a man battling himself to save, two parallel universes, if you just pitch that in the room, that sounds pretty good, right? But like I said, some of the choices, and I'm going to let Uther and Ursa take us through some of the things that they probably jotted down in their weekly notes. Some of the choices just didn't have the same magic, didn't have the same impact. Weren't, maybe, and it could have been because we were shooting in 1967 and we just, this was the ceiling at which you bumped up against doing a science fiction special effects driven 1-hour show for the networks. You know, Desilu, you're at the end of the year, you've spent all your money, and you know you got to make do with what's left in the budget. Perhaps that was it. I'm going to leave it with when we first see our hero villain, anti-hero Lazarus. I don't know why it popped into my head. He looked like Tom Wopat from the Dukes of Hazzard. He was sort of rocking that. I believe he played Bo Duke. He had that hair, and then he had the Fu Manchu mustache, which was. That's where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to pitch the Fu Manchu mustache to my fellow Trekkies here, and let them run with that and everything else that they saw. So, gentlemen, the alternative factor.
Where do we begin? I mean, top to bottom, it just feels like they didn't quite have the words to convey this matter-antimatter universe. They were trying to explore concepts I don't think the writers really understood. From the use of terms like winking out by Spock, which doesn't make sense, or Kirk using minus instead of negative. It just felt like a toddler trying to write science fiction at times, and I'm like, oh, this is tough. This is tough to hear from these characters because they're usually so nuanced and scientific and so on point with everything that they're saying. Well, and then on top of that, you have these really aggressive special effects, which are, for the time, pretty intense. And the concept really isn't a bad one. That's what I think got me the most, was that the whole idea of an alternate universe corridor that was stumbled across by, you know, this civilization which was destroyed by this discovery, and, you know, this person's been trying to stave off a madman, but, you know, you kind of get the point-counterpoint reversal of, well, who's the madman? What are we really chasing? There's an obfuscation of fact. That could all be really interesting and entertaining, but you never quite get enough backstory built into what's happening to really invest yourself. You know, you've got this marooned soldier type out on this planet who never gives you quite enough, which the whole lying thing and the dichotomy of character is fun, but there needed to be like a little bit like Spock uncovers a ancient temple or something that says, oh, it appears that the pictograms here tell us a story of journeying to another universe, and that you know, these two entities came at war, and now we've kind of sort of pieced together what might be going on, and then, you know, Kirk and Spock and McCoy all figure it out on the back end. Like that could have been better, and there are other sci-fi TV shows which have sort of adapted this style story years in the future, and it's become successful. But the execution here was really lacking, and I'm guessing, not being a fly on the wall at the time in the production room, I'm guessing it's because they spent so much money on special effects that they really didn't take the time to make sure that everything else jived. Like they're like, oh, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna have the picture spin, and it's gonna be a negative image because it's a negative universe, but we're gonna call it minus. And then there's gonna be all this confusion, and Starfleet's gonna send a code 1 message for invasion. Why? Like, why would this assume, and why would this impact be so far-reaching with no other explanation? And at no point do they say, well, we just got messages from the Klingon Empire asking us, you know, what we're doing that's, you know, threatening the neutral zone, and, you know, there should be more panic, more confusion. There's just not. And Kirk is at no point, like, rattled at all. Which, I mean, Kirk is usually never rattled, so it does sit in character okay. But this is like, everybody's on red alert at battle stations because of this Code 1 directive, and yet there's like 12 people sitting in the cafeteria just casually sipping coffee. out of Dixie cups. And this dude with like torn up clothing, who's clearly not part of the crew, is just hanging out, and nobody questions it. You know, I mean, there's just a lot here that just like it like misfires. And again, I think we're pointing at, you know, godlike beings, which we've touched on so many times in this first season. It's almost like they ran out of ideas. Like they're trying to legitimize this person. They're trying to bring him back down to earth and make him a little more scientific, make him a little more like grounded in character rather than some ethereal god type being. Maybe because they've done it so many times at this point that they're like, all right, we can't do that again. We got to adjust some things. And it just didn't work. Although, frankly, I think the actor did a fine job at the end. Throughout most of the episode, it felt like they just grabbed a dude, glued some hair to his face, and said, here, read these lines. And then at the end, you get like the flip-flop of the character where it's like he suddenly figured it out in the last sequence. And it's like, oh shit. Like this actually makes a little bit of cognitive, you know, sense where I can piece together what's happened this entire episode. But now there's 2 minutes left. And, you know, for 30-some minutes, I've been on a ride that I just can't seem to care about.
Don't ever use this episode to introduce someone to Star Trek. Ever.
No.
Don't mention it. Don't foretell of it. Don't think about it where you might transmit the thoughts like Spock did at one point. Like, don't. Just stay away from it completely. If you're a James Tiberius Kirk and you hear the name Lazarus from someone you've never met before, shouldn't you just like leave? Like, isn't that a hint? Your name is Lazarus. I mean, don't we know the story behind that? Just get away. I mean, awful, incredibly bad. And for all you Star Trek V, the Final Frontier fans out there, and you know who you are, and I'm sorry, the scene for Cybok and God fighting gets its origin in this episode. I am convinced of it, where we just grab onto each other and we spin in a circle, and there's all these negative effects, and there's someone in that writing room for Star Trek V had to have gone back and watched this episode, because where else do you get the inspiration to tangle with God in some weird area of space that has bad special effects?
What does God need with a spaceship? What does an interdimensional being need with dilithium crystals?
Right. So we can obviously draw a direct line from Star Trek V right to this episode. And can these people drink more coffee? I mean, I think I drink a lot of coffee. That Enterprise must be... Who needs dilithium crystals when you could use Folgers crystals, maybe?
Folgers.
I mean, come on. It's a crystal. You can use it. That whole ship must be wired 24/7 with coffee.
And it makes you wonder, what are the lavatories like on the Enterprise? Because I don't think... Now, hear me out on this. I don't think we've ever seen... Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe in the Calvin timeline, have we ever seen a toilet in the future?
Oh.
Wow. When we're in the prison cell in Star Trek V.
Oh,
and
right.
He presses the button and he sits down.
Right. That's right. But with all the coffee they're drinking on this NCC 1701 Enterprise,
yes,
you know, is it like an airplane where somewhere it's dropping these gut bombs out the back? Because I'm sorry, this stuff gets the senses moving. And why the Dixie cups? Like, of all things, you'd think they'd have like in Strange New Worlds, the stainless steel, you know, mugs or you know, reusable containers. Well, they're using like disposable cups. Maybe they're compostable, and maybe they're using it in like their botany bay. Botany bay? Oh no! I don't know. I'm really curious. Like, and the other side to this is we've seen them use replicator technology. They never really talk about where the food comes from, but at one point it's like it seems like there's like a chef involved, or you know, foodstuffs or food stores, and it's like, you know, I think about the era, right? And I'm going to go off on a short tangent, so come along with me on this ride. But I just saw a video of a gentleman legitimately eating, a 1966 sea ration from Vietnam. And I'm thinking, okay, at the time, the concept of long-term storable foodstuffs was in metal cans, vacuum-sealed packets, typically came with like cigarettes and chocolate and gum. Like, what are they thinking in 1967 in terms of like space transit that makes them believe that coffee beans and or coffee grounds are going to hold good flavor or have some sort of long-term effect that they're going to be able to use these grounds? And what do they do with the grounds afterwards? Do they have coffee plants growing in their botany bay? Botany bay? Oh no! I mean, it really, like, I don't know. This is the episode that it was almost, and I don't like saying there's a bad episode of Star Trek, but this one is pretty rough. This is the one where I start asking these questions, and that's how you know that the episode wasn't as successful as others, because you start thinking of like the logistics, like, okay, what about hair care? Because we have a lieutenant who's working in engineering, also enjoying a cup of coffee here, with a red shirt, who comes in and gets her and tells her about these dilithium crystals, and she's got textured hair. And it gets me wondering, so does Uhura. Everybody in the Enterprise has like perfect hair. Is there a barber on the Enterprise? Do they have sonic showers? Do these sonic showers somehow not frizz out your hair? I mean, look at this. Look at this nonsense I've got going here.
Me too.
What about the future? And okay, if we're talking an antimatter universe, and Kirk, being made of matter, travels to this antimatter universe, would he not come into contact with antimatter universe around him and thus end, like, from what we know of antimatter and matter, like, they cannot interact without creating catastrophic problems. So even these little, like, and we know from the whole, like, transit negative fights we have throughout this episode, their interactions cause cosmic consequences. So Kirk just traveling and just saying, my God, you are here, but also there. That alone should cause cosmic problems. And why is it that they're able to move through time in this? Like, you're traveling dimensions. How are you also transiting time? Because time should be a constant. Otherwise, why wouldn't one just travel back in time and, like, baby Hitler effect? These are the things that, like, when you get into these weeds watching an episode of Star Trek, you've realized that your warp core levels are dropping rapidly. Your dilithium crystals, which, by the way, are just like plastic sort of rectangular boxes that you can just handle with your bare hands, apparently. I always thought they were, like, contained in a matter-antimatter chamber.
According
and
to
like,
Star Trek 2, they are. Yeah, they're deadly.
I mean, why are we retconning everything? Like, and even up until this point, it seems like the dilithium crystals are contained in an area that you're, like, not supposed to go to. And what about these relays? The guy just can, like, tip open the wall and just mix them around and set everything on fire? Does this not set off an alarm somewhere? How is this such a critical system? Just like there, just there. Really just there, not locked or anything? And why are the relays just like little, like, trailer plugs? Why are there little resistors, like physical resistors on a circuit board made of a orange PCB? Like, you think in the future there would be some sort of more complicated system of circuitry like we see, I don't know, Next Generation. It's like, how did they go from NCC 1701 to the Enterprise D, which has all these, like, clear plastic relays, which honestly does kind of make sense in a way. Again, I know I'm off on a ride here, but, like, I have a lot of issues with this episode of Star Trek, and this is coming from, like, for our fans out there, this is coming from a hardcore Trekkie. I love Star Trek V. I really do. I think it's a great movie. I really enjoy virtually every episode of Trek, but you have to understand that being a hardcore fan, being a lifelong fan, does not necessarily mean that there aren't episodes where you're sitting there scratching your head like, now how do they poop on the Enterprise? So there you have it. That's my ride.
And I want to finish because I still have a couple of things to kick around on this one before we gratefully leave the system. Lazarus's line I wrote down, kill, 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 kill. I thought that was, I don't think even John Drew Barrymore could have sold that one there. UrzaMaster talked about how he just casually wanders around the ship for large swaths. Again, I mean, usually, don't you confine him to quarters? Don't you give them quarters?
No security team, nothing.
Right. I mean, he's just like making the rounds. I love the sign for engineering. It looked like I was in IBM headquarters or stuff. Just a very business-like font, engineering. Like I don't know. it just stood out to me as something that I wanted to scream at the screen. So the nebulas, when they first appear and all of this, and they're clashing in the corridor, the first two are enough to have Starfleet issue a system-wide invasion notice and cause ground quakes and tremors on the planet's surface. And yet when it happens on the ship, it happens twice more on the ship, like doesn't even set off an internal alarm. Like, so whatever power he's generating, again, it's just the writers were like, well, Don Ingalls and whomever were just like, well, that's going to take too much time to explain and all that. So, but it's kind of a lazy sense of writing. Where's Scotty, right? I mean, I get it that Sulu might be, off shift when this happens, but engineering fills with smoke and is on fire. You'd think that
the chief engineer.
The chief engineer might want to do that there. I'll hold my question on that till maybe the end of the episode. And then Lazarus in Vasquez Rocks falls off a cliff, right? And again, he's not some super being that we've, immortal super being, like Trelane or something like that. They bring him back to sickbay, and I love McCoy's line, unintentionally, just one of the campiest lines I've heard. He's coming out of it now. I'm like, he fell out of a cliff. How do you come out of falling out of a cliff? Like, it's not like he had a slight fever and it's broken. Like, the man fell 3 stories to the ground, to the hard rocks below, and he's coming out of it now. Like, how do you come out of falling off a cliff? Also, I think it was McCoy who said, get that muscle man out of my sick bay, which I'm sure was not one of DeForest Kelly's high points there. And this... You guys can briefly address this. This was like the first episode, honestly, where Kirk and maybe William Shatner just knew more than we did, where some of his line readings start to approach the parody that we've seen other performers over the years, gently tweak or use in their stand-up routines or what have you. There was sort of that exaggerated phrasing and pausing and over-emoting that I haven't seen. I've actually been very happy to see the tense Kirk, the humorous Kirk that we saw in Tomorrow is Yesterday when he's sparring with the Air Force official. I've seen a lot of good in the captain, but in this one, there were a couple of lines as we got further into the episode where I wrote down Kirk as parody comedy, or question mark, and I wondered if, Shatner was just trying to do his best with what he was given, or I don't know if you guys picked up on that or not. So it felt a little inauthentic to me, that there.
So we'll have to see if that happens in all the lower rated warp cores. Maybe that's where it starts, right? He feels like this isn't happening. Excuse me, I'm not feeling it, and so I'm going to start pausing. Maybe that's what happens. Right. And let me tell you one more thing. If I'm Kirk and I'm getting my butt beat on the planet's surface and my security team is standing there, they're all fired. Because he was getting rocked, and the security team is just standing there watching everything that's going on. shouldn't you be saving your captain? I mean, even if you just want a promotion, I'm saving my boss. I'm not going to stand there as a security officer and watch my captain just get shellacked all over the place because
it's 5-on-1.
Something that
I mean,
right. What are you waiting for? Security? You deserve to be the first ones to go on an away mission now. I mean, come on.
Right.
What's the deal with that?
Yeah. What's the deal with red shirts? I don't. Yeah. I do think Shatner, he may have even spoken to this in interviews, but when he felt that he needed to sell the scene, that's what he would do, is he would elevate his performance to something theatrical. And he does this in other shows too. It's not just Kirk, and it is a Shatner type thing. He's aiming for some dramatic effect that, frankly, it's a Shatner style, which is kind of endearing these days. But I also struggle with McCoy in this episode too, because a couple of times McCoy just sort of lets the patient just wander out of sickbay. He's not going to get away this time, Jim. And then he promptly leaves the room. It's like, what the hell? Like, you didn't take any precautions at all.
Kirk says to him, like, well, where is Lazarus? He's like, I don't know, Jim. It's a big ship. It's like...
Yeah, like, I'm just a country doctor. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, McCoy, were you just like, I don't know, Stuppen Nurse Chapel in the back or something? Like, what's going on here that you're not paying attention to somebody who's been basically treated like a threat? No postal security detail. I mean, even like when Khan was on the ship in sickbay,
right,
there was more security for Khan than, John Q. Lazarus here. Let alone, like, he fell off a cliff. He rolls out of the bed. He's stumbling. So he's not quietly, like, sneaking out of sickbay. He's obviously, like, I don't know. It's just, and then there's nobody around. Like, there's always just random people walking around the ship. Always. And yet, this dude just has access to an engineering panel in a critical area of the ship. First of all, how does he know how to get there? And why is sickbay right next to engineering? Well, why? And if so, let's just say, for argument's sake, like, that's just how the ship's designed. If so, why is there just a critical access port to a circuitry relay in a backside wall? Why not have interior access in engineering? Like, you would have your engineer go around to the backside, to the hallway, to fix, like, your big engineering console. Why are there 8 giant dials on your console? What do they control? Why are they giant dials, of all things? Dials, big circular things. Like, did you just run out of, like, little switches and you had to make dials? I'm sorry, but the problem is when you start to have little problems with an episode that kind of snowball, you start to really pick apart the whole thing, and it's like, wait a minute. This is where you lose people. Like, if you turned on Star Trek in 1967 and this was the first episode you ever saw, it's not a wonder a lot of people are like, I'm going back to Leave It to Beaver.
Sounds like someone's got a case of the pod racers. I love it. Now this is pod racing. You just justified everything I've said about the Phantom Menace right there. You have hit pod racing frustration.
Objection,
which
Your
is
Honor.
why I love you.
Objection,
you can't handle the truth there, Ren. Why don't you go dance some more? Oy.
Well, we're going to dance
You are
away
footloose.
from this episode because I think we've left a smoking crater in our firmament, and we're going to actually, again, we're going to do a little wrap around the sun and jump forward to April 13th, 1967, so 2 weeks later. And as UrzaMaster pointed out, this was actually the final episode aired in season 1, but we here at the Warp Core had decided that the penultimate episode actually has the most weight, the most gravity, and the craziest backstory you can ever hope to listen to. So please tune in for our season finale of season 1. Operation Annihilate, which was originally called Operation Destroy. Annihilate sounds so cool.
Minus negative.
Right.
See?
Was
Anyway.
directed by Herschel Daughtry, and I believe this was his first there. And it was written by former showrunner, story editor Stephen Karabastos. And we talked about Stephen a little bit earlier in season 1. And again, you can find those references if you just click subscribe and go back and check out all of our cataloged content for the Warp Core. But Karabastos, he was a story editor for only a short time. And in fact, on his first day at the job, Gene Roddenberry, pranked him and had a weather balloon inflated inside his office, which prevented him from being able to access his office. So, you got me, Gene. So I'm sure that was just a welcome to the team kind of moment. But your first day on your job and you want to impress, the higher ups and everybody, and you're sitting there and you can't get into your office because there's a giant weather balloon blocking everything. I don't know how Karabastos took that, hopefully in the spirit in which it was intended. But that's a rough way to begin. He was eventually replaced by DC Fontana. But he was still allowed to write an episode, which his position had been to do a lot of rewrites, like what Gene L. Kuhn was doing. But he wasn't, he was part of his contract. He gets the solo episode, and that was this Operation Annihilate. And then, as it turned out cruelly, DC Fontana and Gene Roddenberry heavily rewrote the episode after Karabastos left, because NBC demanded that it be paced quicker. So apparently it was a little slow for network tastes, and so they had everybody come in and try to fix it afterwards. Karabastos would go on. He would do a little remembered but often screened Disney movie for the Wonderful World of Disney. It wasn't for television, but it kept appearing on television, from 1980, called The Last Flight of Noah's Ark, starring Elliot Gould, in which a Indiana Jones style pilot crashes on a South Pacific island, and there's two soldiers from Japanese soldiers who don't know the war has ended, and they all have to turn the plane into a boat and sail back to civilization, with a young Ricky Schroeder, by the way, as an orphaned child. It's weird, but he wrote that, and he did the only other film from the director of Tron. After Tron in 1982, Steven Lisberger did a John Cusack comedy called Hot Pursuit, and Karabastos was involved in that picture as well. So, kind of a just working screenwriter in Hollywood, doing the best he could with what he had. But the real exciting part of this backstory for Operation Annihilate was the young actor who played Peter Kirk. Peter, James's nephew and brother Sam's son, was played by Craig Hunley at the time. He later would change his name to Craig Huxley. And why is this important in Star Trek history? Because in the episode he spends most of it sleeping and writhing. Craig Huxley would later invent the blaster beam. And you know what the blaster beam is, Star Trek fans, because it is all over. It is basically the primary musical accompaniment for V'ger. And every time V'ger is on the screen in Star Trek the Motion Picture, you hear that gwah, gwah. You hear it when the Klingons engage it. You hear it when the Enterprise goes into the cloud. It sounds like this metallic gong, otherworldly, like they're smashing an aluminum pipe with a heavy cymbal. So go back and listen to your Star Trek, the original motion picture soundtrack from Jerry Goldsmith. It's everywhere. And the blaster beam was so popular in the late 70s, the Black Hole from Walt Disney Pictures used it. It's appeared in multiple instances. And he just invented this musical instrument. It's like inventing the synthesizer. So, it has somewhat limited usage if you think about it, when you've heard the effect, the sound effect it creates. But in the right context and setting, it's amazing. And here's young Peter Kirk. He would later go on to invent it and reshape Star Trek music for all time there. There were some outdoor locations on this episode in sunny Southern California, including the campus of UCLA, which go Bruins if you are a former Pac-12 supporter. And then the parasites, which look like deflated jellyfish. Those were actually, literally, those were little plastic fake vomit, little things, little Halloween pranks. They just grabbed bags of fake vomit and then painted or scraped them down to make them either more colorful or less colorful. So in many cases, I would have loved to hear the between camera takes of the actors as they're like trying to emote and all that, knowing that fake vomit is like, that's what they're shooting at, et cetera, et cetera. It's nice to have Sulu and Scotty back, and it's noticeable that they're back since they were both absent in the Alternative Factor a couple of episodes ago. This is the first time, I believe, we are introduced to the concept of Brother Sam, who has a much more defined and on-camera presence in the Star Trek Strange New Worlds series. And he's dead, right? I mean, he's dead, Jim. We don't ever really get to spend any time with Sam. And I think it was a missed opportunity. Again, we're on a 1-hour show, and NBC was already worried about pacing. But Kirk takes Sam's death in stride. And you contrast that with losing his son David in Star Trek III and so forth. It was a little bit of a sticking point for me that we didn't get some moment. There is a moment where he kind of looks into the horizon, and we might see a little bit playing behind his features there, and he might transfer some of that grief into the worry, concern for his nephew. I'll give you all of that. Everyone grieves in a different way, but it still felt somewhat perfunctory if your sibling, you find him dead, basically. And then we have to go on with the episode and worry about these neural parasites. I don't know. I think if this episode was written in today's terms, we would have been able to spend a lot more time and energy exploring what Kirk is feeling. And perhaps that wasn't appropriate on April 13th, 1967, because it's just, well, we got a show to do. The show must go on. We got to save the civilization from these invading parasites. Again, good concept. This idea that these things will get inside your head. It also has a little sprinkling of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, these spores and so forth that just migrate through the galaxy, taking one civilization at a time. So a good concept, better executed than the Alternative Factor, although that's a very low bar. But there's also, again, there's some things in here that at least make you kind of question what's going on. Kirk snapping at Uhura early in the episode was a little like, what? I mean, he was a little unusually harsh, and this is before anybody gets taken over by parasites. And I thought, isn't it dangerous to transport down to the surface of a world on stairs? Like, wouldn't you want a nice, clean, flat surface to be able to make sure your molecules are all there? Like, I can just imagine, if Scotty was busy sipping some of that coffee from a Dixie cup and his calculations were just off, and suddenly you've turned an ankle, you're doing a pratfall down there. I'd say in the future, transporter engineers, make sure that we're in a nice, clean, level playing surface before you start sending people in there. Nurse Chapel's back. Nice to see Majel Barrett and so forth. We haven't really seen her since her lover / fiance was building androids. I think it's been that long since we saw Nurse Chapel. And so that was nice to see her. And we were just talking Lord Uther was saying, my security team better jump in on it. Look how many men it takes to restrain a crazed Spock when he rushes the bridge. It's like literally everyone except Uhura has to jump on Nimoy and like hold him down while they figure out a way to sedate him. I mean, there's like, it was just, Scotty, Sulu, everybody's just like pile on Nimoy, and he's like, let me go. But I want you guys to address Nimoy's performance here because once again, clearly showing that he knows what his character's supposed to be doing. And that also led me to my brief question on Scotty. In the features, we know him as the chief engineer, and that's where he spends most of his time. Was he moonlighting as a transporter guy? Is transportation, however you refer to it, is that part of engineering? Is that part of his portfolio? Like, it just seems like, was it a promotion in the features that he became chief engineer? I mean, I'm honestly, I'm not sure. I don't see it as a problem. I'm just curious what engineer Scott is. I mean, he can stand on the bridge and like just glance across the room and say, "Yep, sensors are ready, Captain." Like, he's so cool. He's so, he doesn't even need to go to a monitor like Spock or McCoy and like look at things. He can just look across the room and say, "Yep, we're ready to go." So let's talk Scotty briefly, but let's talk about Spock even more, who finds himself in a pickle, and we get to learn about Vulcan physiology as well. So.
Well, I think they put Scotty wherever they needed Scotty for the first, for some time there. But even LaForge, didn't they kind of do the same thing where he was on the bridge and sometimes he was engineering and then finally they just relegate him to engineering unless there was something huge that was going on and they bring him up to the bridge.
Got it.
So I think with Scotty it was just he's going to be the Swiss Army knife and we'll put him wherever we need him. Because in Next Gen, that's where we get O'Brien being the transporter chief or whatever it is, something like that, right?
Yep, and he starts out on the bridge too.
Yeah.
So, because he's on the battle bridge when they're docking the saucer with Riker.
That's right.
So, I mean, it's kind of the engineer cutting his teeth, right? I mean, you get a few different things, and it stands to reason because obviously in Star Trek IV, use of the transporter by Scotty is a fairly significant detail. So they kind of build him up as the jack of all trades across the ship because he knows the ship. Where Kirk may be the heart of the ship, Scotty's the central nervous system. He's the one who gets the job done, makes sure everything goes, relatively speaking, smoothly. This episode is interesting because these little vomit piles, to me, always look like just giant boogers. Like, like the fate of a million people is a bunch of floating boogers. Interesting, to say the least, but Nimoy's performance in this episode, I think it's some of the best episodes this season. He really comes across as like it's his flirtation with characterization outside of his normal, logical, composed, balanced self. And I think it makes for good television. For all the weaknesses of maybe the conventional effects of the day, I think the nuance with which his character copes with this is what really makes this a compelling episode. And of course, I think Kirk's performance around his brother's death and his sister-in-law's death make this episode stronger. Like, you get this, I'm the captain, I have to keep my stuff together. Even though, like, you can see it play out on his face somewhat, the vulnerability, the emotion of the moment. We really get a sense of that with Picard in Next Gen's films, dealing with the death of his brother and his nephew.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of captain's foil. We definitely get the 67 version versus the, I guess, shall we say, 87 version. even though it happens a few years later. We get to see a different type of captain. You know, you really get the sort of machismo of Kirk in this episode, and the need to be more emotionally detached. And if you want to draw a parallel with David and his death, it's finally like these things break him in a sense, but he's still able to stay macho and overcome. You know, it's what does Randy Savage say? You got to be able to feel all the feelings. And Kirk really does that. I mean, in a way, like he this is why he has Spock and McCoy. He has Spock when he needs his logic to be checked and balanced, and he has McCoy when he needs his emotions to play out somewhere other than himself. And you kind of get a taste of both of those. You know, McCoy's like, I'm going to do everything I can, Jim, without Kirk having to even say, do everything you can. Like, McCoy just knows. He knows the emotion behind the captain. And this is where I think the episode easily could have had the trappings of Lazarus, where they could have, from a writing standpoint, not played the emotional impact of what Kirk is going through quite as well. You know, because, you know, we know now from Strange New Worlds that Kirk and his brother didn't have the greatest relationship. Sort of like Kirk and his father don't have the greatest relationship. But Kirk and Spock have a real solid relationship. And Kirk and children seem to have a very solid relationship. He definitely plays a father figure well, to a degree. And that comes to play out a little bit more in the movies, of course. But it's in him. Like, he has that capability. But when it comes to his best friends, Spock, McCoy, Sulu, you know, all of his cast around him, his crew around him, those people are his family. And when one of them is threatened, that's where Kirk elevates himself to this leadership role, this capable role that it's like, all right, we're going to pull it out of the stops. We are going to find a way to save the day. And you can trust that. And that is something that I think the best television shows do, is they ingratiate you with your characters before you to know that things are going to be okay. Even if it's like, oh my gosh, are things going to be okay? That's pretty fantastic acting and pretty fantastic writing.
Right.
I think Nimoy saved the episode, quite frankly. His acting, like, once again, like we've already said, really helped get me through this episode, in a sense. And by the way, I think the way that we're going to present them here at the Warp Core podcast, which you should, again, click subscribe, is probably the way they should have ended the first season. This is not a end of the season episode, in my opinion. It felt like a run-of-the-mill Star Trek episode. I mean, good, not great, not bad, just good. But yeah, they probably should have switched the order. Nimoy stepped up to the plate here.
I loved again with Scotty, if we're going to quickly circle back to James Doohan, I love how he's rebellious. You know, earlier we saw him like standing up to the ambassador during A Taste of Armageddon, and here he pulls a phaser on Spock. Right? He's like, "I'm sorry, Mr. Spock, you're not going anywhere." And I just love that sort of like and I don't think we get that in the movies, in the features. How I was first introduced to Scotty, but he's a bit of a rebel, and it doesn't matter whether somebody gives him an order if he doesn't think he's going to act in the best interest of the ship and the crew, and he'll fight you for it. So I did love that. I loved Spock's delivery of the line, "I am also quite blind." And then let's briefly touch on McCoy. I mean, yeah, he's a country doctor, but you didn't think ultraviolet, and it's kind of like, oh shit, I'm sorry, I blew that one, Spock. You're now blind, and if I had just done ultraviolet, none of us would be in this mess. Like, go ahead.
And you've got a Vulcan on the ship that, shouldn't you know, his physiology to the. I keep hearing stuff like I have an inner eyelid. Wait, the ship's doctor doesn't know that. The ship's doctor doesn't. Even though the Vulcans are, it sounds to me at least like during this time period, the Vulcans are so new. They're making it sound like they're very new to Starfleet, but my understanding is they really aren't, right? Because they've been around for a while. So I struggle with that. But then again, we have some knowledge that they didn't have then, right? I mean, we can go backwards with the episodes because it almost makes it feel like with Worf being on the Enterprise, that was such a new thing. You know, he's the first Klingon. I kind of felt like that's what Spock was. So, but even then, you're the medical officer, and you should have some background on this guy's physiology. What are we doing?
Right. I totally agree there. And I again, in conceptual wise, I gets it, and I think execution wise, it cleared the bar that alternative factor unfortunately lowered quite significantly. But to Uther's point, we are accustomed to slam bang finales, possible cliffhangers, possibly multiple cliffhangers in some of our favorite shows, from Twin Peaks to Game of Thrones to Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And this was just more of a, all right, we'll catch you guys in a few months, right back at you. It's not goodbye, it's, so long for now. And so that's just a different, we're accustomed as 21st century viewers of television and consumers. I mean, even comedies have cliffhangers now. I mean, Friends and Frasier and so forth, they would end with like, did they kiss? Is they going to interrupt the wedding? So that's just something that the modern viewer, I'm sure it wasn't picked up on in '67, but that's just something that we've grown accustomed to, is that you're trying to hook people to say, hey, you better come back because you want to find out how this thing gets resolved. And so that's just something.
Yeah, but instead they end it with those awful, jokey end of the thing. And to me, it'd be like, I'm not coming back next season if I have to hear more of that. Because they go right to the jokes again. I mean, thank you for the compliments. Like, you didn't know that Spock can hear you from 10 feet away because, again, you don't know the physiology. I'm going into power racing mode. I'm just going to back off a little bit. It wasn't that bad, but ending with these, and it seems like a very 60s thing, or 70s things to end with the cheesy jokes. I just don't get it. I mean, why don't you just put the laugh track in as well at the end if you really felt like you needed to? But yikes, that's how you end an episode for a season, with jokes.
I think some of that's the modern sensibility. I think Ren was driving at that a bit, where we're really accustomed to the end of the season being your punch, and I think, frankly, at the time, that just wasn't the case. I mean, you just delivered your episodes and you're done. And then if you get renewed, you come back and you make more episodes. It's not... Your audience really wasn't driving, frankly, in that sense, whether or not you were coming back. It was whether the studio liked you. And it's like, well, the audience did okay, all right, bring them back. I mean, I imagine some fat cat in a suit with a big cigar and a hook for a hand for some reason. It just they didn't do cliffhangers because you weren't trying to sell your next season, or potentially your next season was already sold. So rather than entice your audience, you're just like, we're just going to deliver an episode and we'll circle back next year. And I think Next Gen really invented that for Star Trek. They built Times Arrow. They built all of these two-parters or these cliffhanger type things that I don't know if that was that a product of the 80s? I don't seem to remember like Cheers doing cliffhangers.
Well, no, I think as Cheers neared its end, I think they might have done a Sam and Rebecca or some sort of thing there. Actually, I mean, the birth of the modern cliffhanger, I mean, as most television critics will point to, was Who Shot JR in 1979 with Dallas. And, I mean, Dallas, up until that point, had been another nightly soap, network soap that, I mean, did fair in the ratings. Some people who liked it tuned in, people who didn't care didn't watch. But the water cooler, again, pre-internet, pre-social media, all of that was, oh my gosh, a major character is shot, and the identity is secret, and you better tune in to the first episode of the next season to find out who shot JR. And everyone from that point on believes that that's where the, quote, modern cliffhanger television was born. And they never look back, and like I said, it was a primetime event, because by the time Dallas returned that season, for the next season, the ratings were up like 70%, because again, America, it became this something like obsession, like who did it? What, was it his wife? Was it his ex-wife? Was it his kid? Was it his in-laws? So that was the impetus, if you will. So that was 79. This is 67. So we're still about 8 or 9 years away.
12 years out. Yeah. So I mean, it not to excuse maybe the weakness of the episode, but it was a different time. They weren't forecasting out what was going to happen a year from now, because frankly, either they already knew they were coming back, so it didn't matter in a way, or that just wasn't how you did things. And right. I'm glad it changed. Thank goodness for Dallas, Salad, because it was definitely something that changed television. And Star Trek, for all the ways it changed television forever, it did not give us the cliffhanger, at least in that sense. So we move forward to our ratings of these episodes, and I think for Season 1 of Star Trek, these are going to be some different ones. I'd love to hear Lord Uther's thoughts, because he is so passionate in his approach. Lord Uther, what level of warp cores?
Yeah, that first one there, I'm gonna have to go 2 out of 7. Just, it's my alternative rating to this alternative factor, or whatever it was called. I don't even want to remember the episode. I'm going to forget its name. Operation Annihilate probably should be annihilated as well. I'm going to go...
Oh my.
Oh my is right. I'm going to go 3. I'm going to go 4. No, I'm going 3.5. Sorry. To me, it's only halfway there. I was trying to live on a prayer, and it just didn't work. So I struggle with that one. I think there were several issues. And again, I think one of the reasons why I'm also rating it lower is you just don't end a season with that. I understand what you're both saying about that's the time and everything. So maybe my expectations are a little too high. And it almost worries me. I'm looking forward to Season 2 to see where we're going to see this drop-off, or if we're going to see a drop-off. But I feel like these 2 episodes were just a rough way to start, like, to get to the closing point of a season. They're weak, in my humble Trek opinion. And if you don't agree, please click that subscribe button first, and then, because we've gained 2 subscribers since we've actually been on, and then leave those comments below, and we will definitely get back to you and let you know our thoughts on your thoughts, and then you can give us thoughts on the thoughts about your thoughts, and then we'll give you thoughts on the thoughts about the thoughts of the thoughts, and it'll just keep going and going and going.
Nicely done.
So I'm going to send it over. You know what? I'm going to go to Ren over there. I'm going to see what kind of song and dance he can put together, and if he really is footloose on these episodes. So go ahead there, Ren.
Alternative factor for me, and I'm not sure it'll get much lower. It is Uno. It is draw 4, friends. It is a skip, if you're a fan of the classic card game. So many holes, so much that we've already picked apart. No reason to rehash. And for the reasons that we said, it was just the wrong fit in all major categories. And I think actually Ursa might have tiptoed right across it. A basic understanding of what they were trying to communicate. Because again, this is science fiction. Some of these concepts are still radically new. You know, it'd be like trying to write about virtual reality, you know, in the 80s, which just, it was almost hard to even conceive of such a technology. And now it's old hat. But I just feel like, you know, coming from that world, you know, again, we talked about Don Ingalls' friendship with Roddenberry and their shared history. They kind of bit off more than they could chew with that one, and they probably needed a different set of eyes on it to be able to sell that one. Operation Annihilate, I agree with my fellow Trekkie, Lord Uther. It's, especially when you watch it after an alternative factor, you feel like, okay, this is a better episode, but there are still some things about it that make you quibble. And I mean, it doesn't quite land. I would have blinded Spock earlier in the episode. I mean, I would have had them try workshop a scenario with the lighting, for example. I might have done that 10 minutes sooner to give more of a sense, again, of like, is this major character? Like, because we don't know about the hidden eyelid. Is Spock now, like, you know, is he maimed? Is this it? Are they going to write him out? Is he going to have to convalesce in a Starfleet nursing home? They send him back to Vulcan. I mean, there was, that's one thing I might have done, and not made it seem like McCoy's greatest, like, oops, sorry about that, my Vulcan buddy, my green-blooded buddy. I just permanently blinded you because I forgot to do the pros and cons of what we were. But anyways, that aside, I think it's, I'm slightly higher than Uther. I'll go 4 out of 7 because there are things I like. There are other things that are just a little weird. So we'll do a 1 and a 4 for this week's batch.
I'm not going to beat a dead horse on Operation Annihilate or the alternative. I'm going to go 1 warp core for the alternative factor, and the alternate factor, whatever it was, forget it.
Whatever is right.
I mean, there were things about it I enjoyed, but by and large, it was a throwaway episode. Operation Annihilate, I understand that it's a product of its time, so I want to give it a better score, but I'm going to go 4 as well. There were some good things going on. I feel like the crew of the Enterprise could have done better faster, and that is, by and large, where I have most of my issues with this episode. I do think Kirk develops a lot in this as far as what we're going to see going forward, but I'm not going to give the episode a higher rating for that. I think 4 out of 7 is appropriate, but I very much look forward to next week's episode, which is going to be a single episode release for us here on the Warp Core podcast. It is The City on the Edge of Forever. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification icon because you do not want to miss that one. That is a big deal for Star Trek Season 1, for Star Trek at large, and Star Trek at all, because that is one of the foundational episodes of what we're going to see moving forward in terms of adaptation, shall we say, just as a teaser. But from now until then, we continue our voyages into strange new worlds, strange new, maybe not new episodes of Star Trek. And always, we do so with style and aplomb here on Pending Rebrands, the Warp Core podcast. If you haven't subscribed, make sure to click that subscribe button, drop us a like, drop us a comment with your thoughts, and live long and prosper.